Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Energy Healing Network. We are privileged to have Maya Mendoza joining us here today. Hello, Maya. How are you today?
Tim, I am actually very excited to be here, and I feel very energized by the conversation we've had before we started.
Yes, yes. Definitely a pleasure to have you here. Definitely, definitely. Tell our audience where you're joining us from today.
I'm sorry, Tim, say that again.
Tell our audience where you're joining us from today.
Oh, I'm in Scotland. I'm in
Uh-huh.
Scotland in the UK near Glasgow.
Uh-huh. My audience is, here in the UK, we love those. I mean, here in the United States, we love to hear those accents. So I know,
Yes,
it's fascinating to,
yes,
audience. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I could tell you a little story about my accent. One of the first times I traveled to the States, um, I was in an airport and I needed to be taken in a wheelchair from one part of the airport to the other. And I was on my mobile phone speaking to someone in London. And the guy pushing the wheelchair, he said, just keep talking.
Exactly, exactly. They love it here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it depends where, but yes, I agree. And it's, I think I have a very kind of what I would call Middle English voice. I'm a Londoner. I'm a Londoner,
Uh-huh,
not from Scotland.
uh-huh.
So I speak as if I'm from down south. Mm.
Ah, okay, okay. When we say we have kind of different, you know, dialects kind of here in the U.S. too, and I guess you could say down south and the northern states kind of differ as far as how they enunciate words. So,
That's it.
yeah.
That's it. And I would say the same in the UK, across the UK, however small it is, because the UK is actually smaller than California.
Uh-huh.
We have very clear areas, where the accents are completely different to the one I have that I'm
Right.
speaking to you from.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. Fascinating.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, share with our audience a little bit about yourself and some of your vast history. Very fascinating. 4 decades of shining your light.
4 decades of shining my light. Well, I'm going to just be very straight. I'm almost 62, and I have always had a sense of life outside of myself. Even when I was quite young, I had a near-death experience at the age of 9, and I spent 3 days, um, I would say, out of my body, having another or other lifetime experiences, remembering and being shown other experiences that my soul had lived over time and space. So that includes human lifetimes and non-human lifetimes. And when I woke up out of this near-death experience coma, I was quite a different person than the person who went into, than the child who went into the hospital, right? And so it was quite an adjustment actually to be 9 years old, living in a what we would call here a middle class family in London, and to have remembered oneself as a Shaolin monk, as a priest,
Wow.
as a priestess in ancient Egypt, and also as just a very ordinary person with different colored skin to the skin that I was in as a human being, and also then to be out there, with the Palladians. Those of you who are into understanding that we are seeded from other beings, right? That there is a
Mhm.
potential that we are seeded from other beings, at least if not physiologically, then psychologically and spiritually, right? So
Mhm.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
get into any controversialness here, because everybody's truth is different. Everybody's experience of how they are as human beings is different.
Mhm. Mhm. Fascinating. Fascinating. Is that kind of what kind of got you into the shamanic area as far as that goes?
Ah, interesting. Shamanic work is very much earthbound.
Okay.
Okay. And so there are different levels of consciousness that we can access through our brain, through our mind, the way our brain works. And shamanic work is very much about the elements, about earth, wind, fire, water, and working with yourself, your body, and the planet, and utilizing those energies, and the energies of plants and the energies of animals and the consciousness of the world. And I suspect that because the work that was my safe place when I was a child, going out into the garden, being on a swing as a small child, watching the flowers, listening to the bees, feeling didn't I never realized, Tim, that other people couldn't communicate with bees and flowers,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't understand as a child that other people couldn't access the wisdom of the planet, of the creatures around us, of the wind,
Mm-hmm.
because to me it was a completely natural process.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I was always there.
Mm-hmm.
And then gradually, as time went on, I learned how to use shamanic principles and shamanic rituals as a way of supporting myself and other
Mm-hmm.
people in their well-being processes.
Got you. So shamanic storytelling. How were you utilizing that?
Ah, okay. Lovely, lovely question for me. All right. So many times in life, we respond more favorably to stories and metaphors than we do to facts. And I think stories and metaphors are very powerful in we lost each other.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Glad
Yeah,
to have you back.
powerful. I think
Yeah.
sometimes that happens. That happens when you get an energy push. So I
Uh,
will. You asked me the question about shamanic storytelling, and what I was saying was that human beings respond to stories, and they respond to metaphor, and they respond to ideas and their imagination far better than they respond to cold facts. Okay. So many years ago, I realized that if I was working with a client and there was resistance to change, or there were specific traumas, let's say that they had gone through a violent experience, or many things like this. One of my specialities is supporting people in removing trauma, not just from this lifetime experience, but from ancestral experiences. Okay. So I would ask them a question about their experience and how that felt in their body. And then we would take the feeling, and the feeling reveals itself as a story. Okay. And then what happens with me is I seem to have the capacity to track that story through that client's consciousness to the very core of the trauma. So we can go and have a conversation about a pain in the stomach that feels like a fire burning. And when you go into the coals of the fire, you find yourself in an expanded space where you can see the stars in the sky. And then you take a journey to a star, and the star gives you a story of wisdom. And then another star tells you another story, and another star tells you another story, and then you bring it all back in and apply it to the pain, and the pain goes.
wow.
Right. So and on another level, we can map, we can literally start with an event, turn the event into an idea or metaphor, and then track it, even on paper, draw it, sound it, sing it, bring it to a point where you then apply a healing metaphor to each piece of the story. And
Mm,
as you apply the healing energy to each piece of the story, you're unwinding the attachment, the psychological attachment, and the trauma that the brain has fixed on. And it, again, boom, it disappears. The limbic system is plastic, the brain is plastic, it's not
mm,
fixed. So if you
mhm,
give it new information
mm.
in a way that it can absorb without resistance, change is instantaneous.
Yeah, my path into energy work, I was, a hypnotherapist.
Uh-huh.
And so this is kind of some of the suggestive deal with using metaphors and things that I now use within my Reiki energy, because
Of
I
course.
come out more address
Of course.
the chakras. And
Yeah.
so this is kind of some of the things that I'm also doing as far as kind of allowing them to see things differently as far as addressing different forms, areas of the body where the energy centers lie through,
Absolutely.
through storytelling. So it's fascinating that.
Absolutely. And you said something very important with regards to the chakras, because, each chakra has a different vibrational energy and has a different story. We know
Yes,
this, right? And
yes,
in
yes.
fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because there's a process that I've been doing for years that actually goes into you start with the heart. You make sure that the
Mm,
heart is in a good state of balance. Then you go to the base and you find the yin and the yang, the male and the female energy, and they become themselves. They present the energy as a metaphor, presents as a male and as a female. And then you take a healing metaphor in, which allows them to stop being in conflict. It brings together the yin yang, and then you go through all the chakras, and then you will, so that every chakra through the heart is healed,
it's
and then you
balanced.
align them all, and then you align them to the person's true
Yeah.
purpose and true nature. Yeah.
Fascinating. We have so
Mhm.
many, and this is why we do this, because we have so many different ways to get to the same thing.
Absolutely. And there is no one route. There is no one single route. And I think what I enjoy about um energy medicine as a whole is that it allows me to be curious and flexible in my approach with anyone. And I think with 40 years experience in different modalities, I'm able to weave things together perhaps in a way that a novice might not be able to. And it's great fun. It's great
Yeah,
fun.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I'm sure you are. I mean, because the more I've learned, I've taken information from various people or whatever, and I don't, I've definitely not been in the business for 40 years, so I can just imagine how all of this information, because we got so many different ways of approaching it, it just gives you so many different paths that you can take that,
Yes.
and you can just kind of, I'm sure you can kind of in tune with the energy of which leads you to which way you need to go to weave through these things.
Yes. And clients, or whether they're individuals that I just have conversations with in the street sometimes, there is the energy leads, the energy takes the lead. Okay. So what happens is that when I work with people, I the personality, the identity Maya in the world, that is in the world, does not take the lead, right? My greatness, my genius, my soul driven self is in the driving seat, so to speak. and and because the energy takes the lead, it flows where it needs to go naturally. So an example of this, I was doing participating on a coaching training last November, I think it was, and we were split into small groups, accountability groups. And there was one guy, loved him to pieces, Anthony, who just would get so impatient with everybody in the group. And he was the I think he was the only guy that day, and he was really getting pissed off because women can repeat themselves and they need a bit more time to settle in, and this
Yeah.
kind of, and he was on an agenda, right? And at one point, and I looked at him and I said, Anthony, can I just stop you for 1 second? And he looked at me and he said, yeah. And I said, can we just bring this group together? But before we do that, could you just put your hands on your heart like this and breathe in? And he did, right? He
Mhm.
was a personal trainer, he was a yoga instructor, he understood. So, and then I started talking to him and I said, I'm just going to tell you what your body's telling me. So we had this conversation, and I mentioned to him, I said, your kidney, I said, you're so angry and there's an absence of joy in your world. And I mentioned a few other things to him. And I said to him, and we just want to, if with your permission, channel some orange energy into your kidneys. And his whole body went, oh. And then we finished, and I said to everybody, thank you for your patience. Anthony, how are you doing? And he opened one eye and he said to me, Maya, this is the first time you've met me, right? And I said, yes. And he said, what you don't know is I have cancer.
Oh, wow.
I said, oh. And he said, and a few months ago, my kidneys failed. the cancer treatment nearly killed me because the cancer treatment poisoned my body and my kidneys failed.
Mm.
And I said, wow. And he said, so
Mm.
you just got me.
Mm.
In fact, you just got me, and I feel so much better. And then he
Mhm.
phoned me up about 2 months later and said, I was in remission. I'm no longer
Mhm.
in remission. Can we work together? So that was
Mm.
just a fortuitous
Mhm.
experience, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
all I could feel in that meeting was he was so disruptive and so angry and so out of alignment with himself that the rest of the group couldn't function, you know. And I said to him afterwards, the only way that the world can come to a point of peace, talking about where we're at now in the world, is if we come to a point of peace within ourselves.
Mhm.
So if
Exactly.
you want exactly, right? So if you want
Mhm.
your life to run smoothly and you
Mhm.
want more love and more compassion,
Mhm.
then you have to develop in yourself patience for yourself, love for yourself, compassion for yourself,
That's right.
right?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. And the thing, but what people don't really realize too is that this is a science too, because we have what's called brain heart coherence, and we literally transmit a frequency of
We do.
these, vibrations that, I'm sure at that time you could feel the low vibrations that were clearly coming off of him. And it was tuning into what he had going on at the time. And so,
Mm.
people, it influences everyone around you, because it's,
Yes, and I just want to just bring a little thing in because people talk about good and bad and low and high, and
mhm,
I would like people just to understand that there is no good, there is no
mhm,
bad,
right.
or there is no low, there is no high, there just is,
Mhm,
right? So as we are resonating, somebody who is in a state of anger at the time doesn't mean that it's a bad emotion or a bad state. It's just a state,
mhm,
right? And
right.
sometimes we need to experience anger because that's the way that we set boundaries. If you don't
Right.
have another mechanism for setting a boundary, then when you show anger, it says to somebody, stop. This is my boundary. Okay. So for me personally, I like people to understand there is no good, there is no bad, there is no high, there is no low, there is no right, there is no wrong. There just is. And where you are, where you're coming from in your world is actually, whether you realize it or not, you have a choice. You may not be resourced at the
Mhm,
time to make the choice that allows you to be in a different state. But if you're willing to be in a different state, then you can learn, discover, be mentored, teach yourself to be in a different place.
well,
So I
Gina, I
really
kind of,
go on. Sorry.
oh, no problem. I kind of use that an example because with where we're at, I have to kind of give an example of people understanding, and
Of
I
course.
actually have a visual of how these emotional states, what I consider to be lower vibrational states, that how
Sure.
they influence your stress within the body, and it
Yes.
influences so many other things within the
Yes.
body, and to go along with how even manifestations of things, the things that you tune your body into, are kind of what you're creating in your reality. So I have to kind of give an example to people who don't understand how
Yes.
their emotional energy go, kind of scales. So in generally with most
It's
people, they don't
it
even
is
understand.
important. It
Yeah.
is it honestly, Tim, I understand exactly because people need to have a way of understanding, and they
Hmm.
have to come from where they're at,
Hmm.
right?
Exactly.
You have to
Exactly.
meet, we meet people where they are.
Right.
That's
You
the
have
most
to.
important thing. Not And if we meet people where they are, and we just allow them to be where they are, and we do not judge that state in them,
That's the most important
right?
thing. Yeah.
It allows for
Hmm.
a different level of interaction and communication,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
Because when we think about it like this, if you would for a minute, if I judged you, if you felt my energy, judging your physical self, judging what your words, your various things,
Hmm.
your
Right.
you naturally sense that you are not being accepted or honored,
Mm-hmm. Right.
respected,
Right.
right? And
Right.
therefore, your triggers, you have every one of us has a human way of responding in the world to things. So
Right.
somebody might turn around and say that person doesn't respect me, and they're therefore
Mm-hmm.
defensive and closed,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
and it is, I think, one of the hardest things in the world, because we are not taught this as children. We are at all. In fact, we're taught the opposite. We are not taught to accept ourselves. We're not taught to accept others,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
and in that absence of acceptance, we have judgments that
Right.
actually color the way we respond and the way and our capacity. So we naturally limit ourselves, although
Mm-hmm.
we don't necessarily intend to. We naturally limit ourselves, don't we, as to how we respond and what can be achieved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that most people don't understand that they have three brains,
Mm-hmm.
right? They don't understand. They have the
Mm-hmm.
limbic system, which is the reptilian brain at the back. Sorry, they
Right.
have the reptilian, then they have the limbic system, which
Right.
is actually the control mechanism for behavior.
Right.
And then you have the frontal cortex, which
Frontal
is your
cortex.
imagination and your possibility,
Right.
right?
Right.
The big trouble comes from the limbic system in between our ears, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
place that holds the limited programming that
Mm-hmm.
prevents us from being our most magnificent selves. So
Mm-hmm.
so as a hypnotherapist, if somebody has a problem, let's say with addiction,
Mm-hmm.
the stuff, it's in here, it's this
Mm-hmm.
bit of the
Mm-hmm.
brain,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So
Exactly.
when you work with them, you know through your through being in a trance, helping people
Mm-hmm.
to be in a,
Mm-hmm.
a, a, a less acute state of being, right?
Right.
A more
Right.
fuzzy space,
Mm-hmm.
that you can support that person as a hypnotherapist in the work you do to loosen the
Mm-hmm.
ties and the relationship that they have with the behaviors that keep the addiction in place.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Okay,
Exactly. Exactly.
right, exactly. So you know exactly what we're talking about here. I don't
I
have to
totally get you.
yeah,
Totally,
right.
totally get
And
you.
in that space where you loosen up, let's say the fibers, the wires, the stuck
Mm-hmm.
together spaghetti, you loosen it
Yeah.
up. What
Mm-hmm.
comes in is possibility and light,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the looser it gets,
Mm-hmm.
right,
Right.
the more
Yeah.
possibility of change.
Exactly. Exactly. The plasticity within the brain. Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me to the next question about how you're dealing with karma and ancestral epigenetics. 'Cause we kind of touched on it a little bit,
Mm,
epigenetics is far, and that's kind of why when we talk about as far as within this country, I kind of have to get in this topic a little bit, because of things within this country that my people have dealt with, have passed on through what called epigenetics. So
absolutely.
yeah, so
Do
but
you
how?
know, Tim, it isn't just America, because I was discussing this with a friend the other day. So let's be a little bit controversial for a minute,
Gotcha.
right? The whole Western world, right? The success of the Western world
Mhm,
is based on elitism,
mhm,
and it is based on actually the suffering of humanity,
mhm.
whatever color your skin,
This is true.
right? So
True.
indentureship, think about Australia for a minute, right? So
Mhm,
you get these white elitists, okay? And I know I have a
mhm,
pale skin, but okay. So that go over to and they suppress the indigenous population,
mhm,
just as the English and the Spanish and the French did in the Americas, right?
mhm,
And then in Australia particularly, they shipped over from Britain, right? Not darker
mhm,
skinned black people. They switched over white people, right? Poor people, Irish people that were indentured and imprisoned to work as unpaid, effectively slaves to create wealth for the elite. Okay, so
mhm.
this
Right,
is
right.
this is a huge, and you go back to the Roman times, the Romans were doing it. Go back before that, the Sumerians were doing it, the Egyptians
Mhm,
were doing it in ancient times.
right.
It's a historical issue. Okay,
Mhm. It is.
so if we're talking about ancestors and
Mhm,
DNA, and how to deal with that, the first thing I'm going to iterate to everybody is the mitochondria in women down the female line through the egg, right? Goes back, the energy is held 7 generations back. So if there is a trauma 7 generations back, that trauma is 7 generations. This is proven.
Yeah, okay.
7
Okay.
generations back. So what's that? Great, 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 great grandfather. Okay. Or where are we going? 300 years, something like that. Okay.
Right.
I'm great with numbers. So let's say that 300 years ago, and let's talk about, as you were saying, your people, right? Somebody goes to Ghana, right, and raids a village and takes a whole bunch of Ghanaian people and puts them in the Caribbean on sugar plantations.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
7 generations ago. That shock and that grief is then embedded through the female line right up till now. Till now. Now, look, I have, I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish by birth, both sides of the family. We have 5,000 years of persecution to deal with. Okay, right. So, and there's certain things that show up in our whichever race or culture it is. There's certain things that will show up, certain attitudes, certain illnesses that get created through these epigenetic, right? We'll discuss that in a minute if you want us to define that. So what happens is that with the ancestral work, somebody can have a you know how you get like in families you get illnesses that run through, right? So all the men in the family get guilt. Sorry, gout. That's what I was trying to say. All the men in the family get gout, right? It runs through my family over at least every generation that I know of now. All the men get gout. Okay, so I had a client who came to see me because every one of her female relations on the mother's side died from developed and bowel cancer, and she had the beginning markers. So she came to see me and said, what do we do to make sure this doesn't develop into cancer, and how do we deal with this? So we had to so with the ancestral with the history and the traumas, the more traumatic an event, the more it gets hooked into the expression of your DNA and what's possible for your body. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? I don't want to.
Oh yeah, most definitely, most definitely.
So in the same way that your eyes might be blue, your hair might be blonde, right? That it moves through. Now, with this particular individual, as we went in to do as I was looking, because I was literally moving into the sphere of DNA, the dimension of DNA, because I have that capacity. It's a slightly different work to the work that other people might do. And I'm looking, and I knew her name, her mother's name, her grandmother's name, her aunt's name. Okay, so, and I couldn't separate them. It was in that space where the cancer lived, where the trauma lived. This family, the women were enmeshed. So the first job we had to do was separate them out, figure out, and literally go, right, you stand there, you stand there, you stand there, and then we had to literally go back to the first one, resolve the trauma in her, resolve the trauma in there, resolve the trauma in the grandmother, resolve the trauma in the grandmother's sister, and then do some other interesting work with this client's daughter. And when we'd done that, we resolved the trauma in hers. And you know what? She went back to the doctor 3 weeks later. Everything was fine. But that was the most complex ancestral unwinding that I've ever come across, because there was no difference. They literally, these energies, the soul energies, did not know the difference between themselves.
Wow.
Yeah. That was a teaching. It gave me a real insight into into how we mirror each other. And you know, in the brain as well, that you
Mm-hmm.
have these mirror neurons, right? So there are
Mm-hmm.
areas in
Mm-hmm.
the brain where when you walk into a room, your brain begins to seek out what's familiar in others, or it seeks out what we would call a vibration, an attitude, an emotion, and then it starts to replicate what is the dominant, let's call it vibration, in the room. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so you can walk into a room and be full of love and light and peace. The room
Mm-hmm.
can have six angry people. By the time everyone's been in the room for 10 minutes, everyone's angry because the dominant energy in the room is anger. And it comes from these mirror neurons, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the brain. The brain
Right.
synchronizes.
Right.
So even more so than ever, and that's the scientific, you know, when people say, oh, I can feel the vibes, that's the
Mm-hmm.
scientific version, the neurology version of I can feel the vibes. So
Right. Right. This is what we want to know
would,
too.
right. So what would we do, Tim? What would we do if we walked into a room and we decide and the room felt angry? What would you tell your clients, your friends, your family to do under those circumstances based on the mirror neuron idea?
That's a good question. Um, because that that's kind of the thing. They're trying to get people to protect their energy. But in a situation like that, like especially if a person is not aware of it, it's kind of hard to say what should I do.
Okay, so I would say the greatest gift we can give ourselves is understanding how to manage our own energy,
Right.
to
This is
manage our own states, right?
right.
So if I walked into a room and I felt anger, I have two choices. Well, three actually. One is I can accept that the energy is overwhelmingly angry, and therefore I am likely to start feeling angry and agitated and impatient. Number one. Number two, I can walk out the room so that I am not affected by that. And the third one is to bring my own practice of peace and love and joy into the room at a higher density than the anger.
Well, yeah. And
Yeah,
so that I guess that's kind of where this is with myself, which because just generally I have the tools to do so. You lift your vibration, well,
yep,
higher the way it's basically, as we call circumventing these things, and these are the tools that you're trying to teach people to also do themselves. But like that's when you ask me, what would I tell them to do? The first thing I probably do is start working on getting the tools to start learning how to manage their emotional energy.
there you
So
go. So the foundational skills, what's so important in life is having the foundational skills of self-awareness and self-management, regardless of where you come from, regardless of your history, regardless of your habits.
right.
One's responsibility, in my opinion, as a human being, is to understand how to make the best of oneself.
Right. Well, one of the first things I'm trying to teach clients now do is first being conscious of these things because
Yes,
you're walking into the room and if you're not having these thoughts, then you don't necessarily, you just kind of become a victim of these things. And so being conscious of your own emotional state is some of the things I try to teach in the beginning because the tools kind of as they progress with the people I work with, as they progress through what they're doing and they get better at learning how to manage themselves, but that it kind of becomes second nature. But you can't get that way until you first become conscious of your own internal state. And so,
it is. I'm going to share. I'm going to be quite personal. Share something very personal, actually.
mhm,
Now, if that's all right. So I have had a particularly challenging run with COVID. I got COVID
mhm,
first in 2020, in the beginning of
mhm,
in March, and
mhm.
I've had COVID 5 times, and each time it's obviously been a slightly different strain.
Wow.
And it got to the point where in February, I started to not just have COVID, but every virus that was going. It's like COVID somehow
Mm,
hijacked my immune system,
mhm,
and
mhm.
I even had a repeat of childhood illnesses that I shouldn't have had again, like
Oh wow,
mumps.
really?
Yeah,
That is
so
that is
it's
wow.
crazy, right? And and so the whole of this last year has been a challenge of this kind of deepening malaise in my body. Okay, now what's been interesting is I'm now participating, as I have before, in a Chinese medicine program. I'm doing acupuncture and herbs and qigong, and in 6 weeks, as you can see from my energy, my countenance has lifted up. There's a way to go, but I'd like to get back to my true magic, but we're getting there, right?
You're getting there, right?
But the point is that I'm making is that in that state of malaise, sometimes what's important about where we're at is what's going on. If we don't look at it as I'm a victim of COVID, I'm a victim of virus, I'm a victim of illness, and you say, what is the purpose of this for my highest good? My highest good and the most wisdom that I can gain from this. This is how I approach life, right? And how my clients approach life after we've had a few conversations. And I have also quite a lot of trauma in my history. I had in my teens, I had a boyfriend who was in the Falklands War. He came back from the Falklands and used me as a punch bag for 6 months and nearly killed me for instance, right? So and that trauma, that trauma it gets embedded in your body, in your physiology, okay? And anyway, so I was having a bit of trouble with this debilitation, but I went into myself at one point. I had a very, very bad COVID experience. I had a temperature of 39 Celsius, which is 104 in Fahrenheit for 4 days. Okay? This was the last run. And what it allowed me to do was not be in my body. It allowed me to observe, because my mentality was going, what is for my highest good here? And I looked at this and I thought, my God, it's this whole process of illness is literally breaking down my resistance to light and love. It's breaking down my personal defense mechanisms to the point where I have no resistance. Right? My immune system collapsed. I have no resistance. What do in the absence of resistance, what do I choose to bring in? Now, me being me with 40 light, exactly, right? And so I have been smiling about these two things, this COVID experience, because clearly for me, it has allowed me to erode that which was not my greatness in myself. It's allowed me to be more present, more grounded, more centered in my soul energy. Yeah.
Right.
But I could have gone a different way.
Yeah.
Right. And the
The
reason it
perspective.
didn't, yeah, because of the perspective. Thank you for that. Yes, exactly. The perspective. So if we're talking, if you and I and your energy healing network is talking about healing and wellness, it starts with how can things be better? Not they're so awful, I'm a victim, this person is wrong, that person is wrong, this government body should help me. This is you say, how can it be better? What is my soul trying to teach me now? What does it want me to know? Best wisdom, I think, no?
I'm complete silence right now. That's exactly, I need the audience to intake that, really. And as well as myself. We all need to be reminded of that sometimes. But generally people are programmed to, I guess they call themselves venting, but at the end of the day, they don't understand that how the perspective changes how things going on within themselves.
Yes. And I think what's so interesting is it's so easy for us to believe that we have no, what I would call, agency in life, right? And what I mean by that is, if we are brought up in poverty, if we are brought up by parents who have addictions, if we don't have good food to eat, if we can't get adequate medical care, if the school system is failing us, we can think that we are victims in life. We can grow up to think that we have no agency, we have no capacity to master our destiny, right?
Well, it can definitely, and the thing
Yeah.
is, coming, as again from in this country with the history of it all, it as far as people that look like me, it you could say it was a mindset that was passed on. So you could say if you haven't necessarily,
Excuse me. Yeah.
examined and healed that particular deal, but that's the power of some of the things that I've been able to learn myself. Because once you're able to kind of start healing these things and educating yourself on some of these things, you actually realize how much you're not a victim. You're only a victim of the things within your head. And a lot of the times, my perspective on things change, and that changes things within the reality. Because just as you said, it's a lot of things within the community, there's sicknesses and things like that because of various mindsets within the community I've come from. And to go along with things that you just spoke on right now, that that's very deep about stuff that's passed on within the body, because that was deep about all these people within the energy systems. But it just has me thinking that there's a lot more of this going on than we
Mhm.
actually imagine.
When you listen to people like Bruce Lipton, right, and Joe Dispenza and Greg Braden, who are kind of my silent mentors from years ago, because I've been doing
Yeah,
this for such a long time, as they began to come out into the open themselves with the,
yeah,
which what used to be called pseudoscience, which is now new science. They
exactly.
were talking about epigenetics, right? So epigenetics is how you, okay, DNA. We understand the helix.
Mhm,
Within that DNA, scientists used to say that there was junk DNA,
mhm.
right? They didn't
Right.
understand
Mhm.
how all of that material didn't appear to have a function.
Right.
So now we understand it has a function, and what activates that specific function is our intention, our capacity. So rather than being, let's call it victim, rather than being the victim of our history, because
Mhm.
that is what we are programmed to be,
Right.
we can be the architects of our own
Mhm.
destiny
Right.
by choosing a different way. But there's a caveat, Tim, right?
Mhm.
Let's see if
Right.
you and I can, right? The caveat is you do not create from lack,
Exactly.
right? You
Exactly.
do not
Right.
create from that space of feeling sorry for yourself or not having
Right.
enough. You create from the mastery of your capacity
Mhm.
to envision,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's the mistake in the law of attraction as it used to be taught through the
Mhm.
90s and the 2000s.
Mhm.
People were trying to talk themselves
Mhm.
out of their situation. And in talking themselves out of the situation, because what you focus on
Mhm.
magnifies, they were
Right.
perpetuating their own
This is,
pain and
yeah.
stuckness,
Right.
right?
Right.
So if you focus on the end result, the magic you want to create, and you only then work on the bits of you that get in the way,
Mhm.
you will have successful manifestations
Mhm.
and you will create from your soul space. And that's worth spending your time on.
Yeah, it is, and it kind of comes back to why I definitely I get your point as far as there are no bad vibrations, but kind of trying to get people to understand that you couldn't create from these that lack of that. It's a negative emotion that you just kind of that you focusing on this instead of looking at the intention of the
Right,
positivity of what you're trying to create. And
right.
so that's why I felt that it's important to kind of people to understand that. Because
Yes,
just like you just said, I've been reading some of this stuff for 'cause for 20 years I was a personal trainer. And with that, I'm taking mindset trainings, and like I said, it led me into hypnotherapy and all these deals. But at the end of the day, it kind of came back to some of these deals as far as focusing your intention on things and
yes,
not so much worried about what you don't want, which is kind of thing people look at what they don't want. Focus on what you do want, and the intention of that,
yes.
and that generally is where the magic happens. And
I,
so.
I'm gonna take it another step forward,
Mhm.
because again, when you're focusing on what you do want as a way of getting away from what you don't want,
Yeah, that can be a problem too.
you're still
Yeah,
amplifying, and
yeah,
that's the
right,
trap. That's
right,
the trap why people think that they don't have control, right?
right,
Because
right.
if so, let's say, I've always been a big curvy babe, okay? I've
Okay.
never been slim in my whole
Right.
life. It's a standing joke, okay? I just don't do skinny. Anyway, so but it's just not me, right? Just
Right.
don't do that. It's just not me. So as a child, my family were obsessed with my weight. They were
Okay.
obsessed with what I looked like, and they were obsessed with me
Mm-hmm.
being in a different shape. But so I learned
Mm-hmm.
to not value and like my body as it was.
Uh,
So they
yeah, good.
wanted me thinner, and I would have to, and they had me on diets all the time. So you
Mm-hmm.
end up in a situation where, like more than half the planet in the West, okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's face it, everyone's
Mm-hmm.
obsessed about their body shape and their size. The more you obsess about thinness, the more you want to eat the chocolate donut,
That's exactly right. That's exactly
right?
right.
You've been a
Yeah.
personal
No, I
trainer, right?
definitely 20 years of
Okay,
it. Yes.
so what's happened with me? We're going to laugh about this as well, because I'll be personal about me, because I'm an open book. So I am 100 pounds down on my top weight, 100 pounds down. But did I diet? No,
No, probably not.
no. What I did? No, because I'm not going to go. Did I diet? No, because dieting would have triggered the reasons for me overeating to feel safe and protected in the first place. So what
Right.
did I do? I just focused on feeling safe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I focused on the underlying, what's
Right.
the real issue underneath the
Mm-hmm.
overeating, underneath the
Mm-hmm.
holding body weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel
Mm-hmm.
safe. I don't
Right.
feel loved. I don't.
Right.
So you focus on that,
Right.
and over 5 years, right? This
Mm-hmm.
weight is down and it's coming off. I don't have to
Right.
diet. I don't put on weight. I can eat
Mm-hmm.
whatever I like. The weight keeps coming off. It keeps
Right.
coming up to the point where you're going to laugh now. We're going to laugh. I have one pair of jeans left in the cupboard that fits me because everything's
Uh-huh.
falling off, and two
Uh-huh.
tops. Right? That's it. And
Uh-huh.
I have resisted, literally, right? I have resisted buying clothes because I know
Mm-hmm.
I have reached a point in my consciousness where I am
Mm-hmm.
so safe and comfortable in myself, my body, and my life, that
Mm-hmm.
everything else will continue to fall away that is not truly me.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And see, that story you sharing about feeling safe and things of that nature, here's what I had to learn. I had to learn that all of the stuff, well, first off, you learn early in the game that you try to get people to not keep focusing on diets because first of all, diets are temporary lifestyle. So it never works anyway. And like you said, it makes a person, it reinforces something that in your brain, well, it's something wrong with me. I need to do this. And so
Yeah.
it always backfires. But when I was led in it until the healing I'm doing now all of a sudden I understood that your root chakra has a lot to do with this safe that you feel and the anxiety that you're feeling that's coming
Yeah. There's something happened for me talking about safety. Um, and I realized a few weeks ago, only a few weeks ago, that a friend of mine said to me, "Well, if we're going to create this, the only way for your brain to cooperate with the
on.
creation is for it to know it's safe for that change to take place,
Mm-hmm,
right?"
mm-hmm,
And she asked me a couple of questions because I work with a lot of other very special people who have these
mm-hmm.
skills. She asked me a couple of questions, and I went back to her and I said, darling, I'm not sure that I really understand what it is to be safe, to be really safe, right? And she said to me, okay, let's talk about this, because if you know you're not safe,
Mm-hmm,
you must have an idea of what safe is. You must
mm-hmm.
have a concept of safe. And I went, sure, of course I do.
Right.
Okay. So I'll tell you this story again. As a shamanic storyteller, I'll tell you a story.
Okay.
So she said to me, can you recreate your understanding of safety? If it's outside of you, right?
Right.
And she said, what would that be for you? Well, I had an experience a few years back in San Francisco Zoo. Okay.
Mm,
And
mm,
I don't like zoos because I don't like the idea of being trapped myself or being in a cage or being in an
mm,
environment. So they make me go a
mm,
bit crazy. But
right.
on this occasion, it was my birthday and somebody bought me a zoo safari. And
Mm,
we went into the areas of the San Francisco Zoo where they're doing where they're rescuing species. Okay. Okay. So I'm on a truck and we drive in this truck into this enormous field of rhinoceroses.
mm,
Woo! Okay. So then they bring us apples and they say, you're going to feed a rhinoceros. So, as always with me, which rhinoceros comes over to me? The biggest mother.
yeah.
Is the size of, okay. Well, I had my hand out, and this animal, the idea, I felt it, right? He was magnificent, and his little soft lips in my hand, right? And this energy, this creature who could have stomped me to death, was so
Mhm,
excited to be fed apples by me,
yeah.
and he was so safe and so present, and I,
Mhm,
as I remembered this memory, I absorbed how safe and how comfortable he went,
mhm,
and
mhm,
my psyche to understand that feeling of safeness, that
mhm,
capacity to be so present to the experience and
mhm,
so excited by what was happening in safety. So I took that energy, and then I had a little conversation with my unborn self. Okay, I went into my unborn self in my mother's womb,
mhm,
and I felt that space, and I felt the fear and the sadness and the aggression and the grief and all of these emotions that my mother was going through because of where she was at when she was pregnant with me.
right.
And then I said to myself, oh dear, you're absorbing, your understanding of the world is being created by
Mhm,
this experience that you're absorbing from the mother. The neurons in your brain are mirroring your
mhm,
mother's emotions, and you have
mhm,
made a decision. Your body has made a decision. The world is unsafe and you have to protect yourself.
right.
So I looked at this and I went, right. And I took that safeness and I went into every single cell in my body. And I said, we are filtering out all those emotions that are not mine, that do not belong to this body. And we are replacing that with safety. Do you know what? The weight loss that has happened in the
Mhm,
4 weeks since I did that exercise,
yeah.
literally, I was throwing clothes away yesterday. I mean, clothes that were not, literally, I went through my cupboard. I put on something to wear for another podcast,
Mhm,
and I thought, I can't
mhm.
wear this because I look like I'm wearing my mother's clothes.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So,
You
so
live.
at the end of the day, if we can allow ourselves to experience what it is to be truly safe, and we then apply that to every experience that we ever have, going backwards a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, that begins to soften the tightness and the limitations that we don't know that we have, that we can soak in the safety. We can allow ourselves to experience a change in our mm, in our capacity for love. Let's call it that, in our capacity for love, right?
Right,
And
right.
if love and safety is the antidote to everything else, I would
Mhm,
love for people to
mhm,
really hear what I just said,
mhm,
right?
mhm. Yes.
And imagine in their mind, if you do not know, if you really don't know what it is to be safe, or if you feel you have to fight for safety, or you have to fight for respect, or you
Mhm, mhm.
understand that you do understand the difference between the not having of it and the having of it, even if it's
Mhm.
just a concept.
Right. Exactly.
And then look at that concept and go, where could I absorb that knowledge, that wisdom, that experience from?
Mhm.
From my imagination, from a movie character, from creating an alter ego for myself,
Right.
right? From depending on what your knowledge is in the world of your interdimensional capacity, right? Right. Can I go into another level of my soul? Can I go? Can Is there an ancestor that has the
Mhm.
answer to this problem? right?
Right.
So what happens is, in that state of curiosity, we empower our imagination to seek an
Mhm.
answer that we can't do in that limited state of victimhood.
Right.
God, that's profound. I'm being profound today with you, Tim. You are
Ah,
great. You are holding a beautiful space with your
ah,
energy network here. Yeah.
yes, yes. This is why I do it for people like you to see to absorb all this beautiful energy and share it with the world. You
I
know.
hope I'm not being too I hope I'm not being too technical for people.
Oh, not at all. They need to understand, because that's what I want people to do, become educated on how these things can heal. And we all have our own story to tell about it. So,
Yeah.
and just like that, our time is going so fast. We have about 5 minutes left. I want you to kind of
Sure.
touch on your book and to go
Oh my
along with.
goodness. So my books are from a long time ago, actually. They were bestsellers back in the 90s. And at the moment, if they are not published in real time, but you can go um, onto Amazon and search for my name, and my books will show up, and you can buy them secondhand at the moment. Right, I'm redigitalizing them at some point, and turning them into courses and various other things. But what the two books allow you, the first one is called The A to Zen of Life Maintenance. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to build foundational skills of self-awareness and to ask yourself questions that allow you to map the process of the problem. And then it shows you how to bring in the resources of love, light, the antidote, right? Whether it's a general antidote or a specific antidote.